Hello everyone and welcome to today's chat. My name is Trinia and I'm a team member here at Understood, and today we're going to be talking about how to help kids with ADHD manage screen time. And we have Dr. Jodi Gold joining us today. Jodi is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. She also is the author of Screen Smart Parenting: How to Find Balance and Benefit in Your Child's Use of Social Media, Apps, and Digital Devices. Jodi, it's so great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'm so excited about this topic. I am a former high school special ed teacher, and this was definitely something that was a challenge for me in my classroom. So I'm excited to have you here and to get your advice and suggestions about these things.
Sure.
Would you like to give any other background about your experience and your education to our viewers today?
I'm a board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I run the Gold Center for Mind Health and Wellness, where we sort of evaluate families in sort of a comprehensive team approach. And the way that I got really interested in sort of parenting around digital technology was that a few years ago, I would go to work, and every single day, every single hour, this topic would come up. And then I would go home and pick up my kids who were younger at the time, and this topic would come up as well, but in a more younger way. Like, should you let your child learn to read on an e-reader, and should they play educational games? And so I actually went to Google and the Real Library to try to find out, what the solution was and how we're supposed to do this in the 21st century. And I was really surprised that there was literally almost nothing that's peer-reviewed and medical in terms of understanding developmentally what it means to grow up in digital technology. So that's sort of how I got involved with it. And I've written a book and I speak around the topic, but I'm telling you, it is so challenging, and it continues to change, basically every week.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our viewers out there, we are going to be taking your questions as we go through today's chat. So go ahead and type your questions in the chat box, and it would be helpful if you can give us a little bit of detail about your question. Maybe your child's age might be appropriate, so that we can kind of gear it more specifically to your situation. But to get us started, while people are coming up with their questions, Jodi, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about this issue. We know that kids with ADHD are more likely to struggle with managing screen time, and I'm wondering if you can talk about why that's the case and what sort of difficulties they might encounter as they're using screens and computers.
So as probably everyone watching this realizes, kids with ADHD have particular challenges. I think that managing digital technology is challenging for everyone, but kids with ADHD, it's a particular challenge. And the reason for that is that this is a disorder that causes a dysregulation in attention. It's easy to be impulsive, inattentive, hyperactive. All of these things, if you sprinkle in a little bit of technology and screen time, can be even more challenging. So there's a lot of benefits to the technology and the screen time, but with kids with ADHD, we have to be a bit more vigilant. They're likely to have more difficulty getting on and off the devices. They're likely to hyper-focus when on the devices. They're more at risk to be impulsive and to get themselves into trouble online. It's hard for them to change gears and get offline. And then they also tend to have unique challenges with becoming overstimulated and even worked up and agitated after they've been online. So I think that there's no reason why kids with ADHD can't benefit from all of technology, but the truth is that as parents and educators, we have to be more vigilant in helping them navigate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're waiting for questions to come in, maybe I can start with a question that I had as a teacher, and that was, I was in a school where students were expected to be on computers pretty frequently for doing assignments, reading stuff, and it was just a very constant battle to make sure that kids were actually doing what they're supposed to be doing on the computer instead of getting distracted by games or just going online or chatting with their friends. Do you have any advice for strategies that parents and teachers could use to monitor what the students or the children are doing and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. The first thing to talk about in school and at home is this idea of multitasking. There's this idea out there with kids today that they're better multitaskers than we are. And that's a huge fallacy, because if you look at the neuroscience, there is no such thing as multitasking. Actually, your brain shifts from one activity to another. So the research shows that it's more exhausting on your brain, so you get tired. When you're working, you're less efficient. And actually, when they do pre and post tests of people trying to multitask, they actually retain less. So the kids that are trying to pay attention and also trying to play a game and then also trying to be on Snapchat, basically they're not doing any of it very well. I think it's helpful for kids to actually understand that. I actually think it should be in the curriculum in the schools to talk about sort of the science behind multitasking, because most adults, when they talk to kids, the kids are like, yeah, you just don't know how to multitask. So I start there with helping kids understand that they might be better served not switching around so much. The next piece is that one of the challenges for educators and parents today is, one of the skills you have to learn today is to learn how to manage your time, right? Like, devices are not going anywhere. Your kids are going to spend more time on their devices than they're going to spend sleeping, eating, going to school, or hanging out with your family. So one of the goals of adolescence is to teach kids how to regulate themselves, both online and offline. And that means being sort of self-aware of like what you can manage. And the truth is, as boring as the English class is, if you're on social media or on a game the entire time, you've missed all of it. And there has to be a balance. And parents kind of want everyone to take the computers out of the classroom. But the truth is that you're going to grow up and go to college and go to work and have to manage this as well. So I actually think that you should be learning how to do this in school. I'm glad that devices are in the schools, that we have this opportunity to make it a learning experience. Having said that, it's easier said than done. I imagine as a teacher who's walking around and seeing that no one's actually taking notes on their computers, I actually try to convince teenagers to use one of the apps where you can, I think it's called like Timeout is one of them. Self-Control. Self-Control is one of the apps, and there's a couple of other ones. And what you do with these apps is you can set it for like half an hour or 45 minutes, and you can block whatever it is you want to block. So you can still be on your computer doing whatever, but maybe you block Amazon or YouTube or Fortnite or whatever it is that you don't want to be on for a period of time. But the key is that teachers and parents should not be doing this. It's the teenagers themselves that should be doing it. Because what it does is that actually helps them to figure out that actually things are better for them if they're not on YouTube the entire time, or they thought they could multitask and actually they can't. So I really think that giving the kids exercises, saying, hey, let's just try blocking it. And you can unblock it anytime you want. To be clear, with all of these apps, any self-respecting fifth grader can, in 3 or 4 different controls, undo it. So it's not about like restricting your kids. It's about helping the kids learn to regulate themselves. And that's what I'd love to see people do in the classroom.
I love that idea of helping them to kind of do this self-regulation instead of parents and teachers always being like the rule bearer and making them, or trying to make them do it, because as you said, like, kids know how to get around these apps a lot of times, and so them learning how to do it themselves and going through that process is probably a really great idea. We have a couple of questions coming in about like specific time limits, and I know that as I was growing up there were regulation or like recommendations for how much time kids should spend online or in front of a computer. I'm wondering, is that changing as our society moves towards more screen-based living? Are there any limits that we should be putting on kids, or is it kind of a case-by-case basis?
So the research shows that the average teenager, believe it or not, is on a device over 7 hours a day. And that does not include multitasking, and that supposedly does not include homework, which seems like a very hard statistic to believe, but if you start watching your kids, you won't be so surprised by it. Right now, the Academy of Pediatrics and most of us have moved away from trying to say your child should be on for 1 hour, your child should be on for 2 hours. There's been a real shift, which I think is really helpful, to understanding how your child uses it and less about how much. Because what we find is that you can have these kids that are connected to social media all the time, but if they can unplug to do their homework or to have dinner or to hang out and they're not overly invested, it's not probably a problem. On the flip side, if you have somebody that cannot unplug, someone that's constantly thinking about it, regardless of how much time they're on it, they're much more vulnerable. So what you need to know, do you remember those ads like years ago, those public ads, like it's 8 o'clock at night, do you know where your child is? or 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like this is where we are now. Like I challenge the parents out there, do you actually know what's on your child's phone? Because most parents know the ballet schedule and the soccer schedule and the school schedule at the back of their, they can just give it to you. But when you say, hey, what social media is your child on? What games does he like to play? They're like, oh, I don't know. The truth is that we need to understand what our kids are doing. And then you want to understand if your child's on it 2 or 3 hours a night, how are they doing it? For instance, if my child was on it and they were writing a blog, making a video, even maybe making a Musical.ly video, being creative, drawing, I might say, hey, go for it. Be on it all night. On the flip side, if my child is on Snapchat or a single shooter game and is a complete waste of time, I may want her on it for an hour. So the first thing you need to do is understand how your child uses it. And if they can use it well, then I worry less about the time. And the thing you need to be asking yourself and your kids is how invested are they? It's the investment that is the issue. Overly invested kids get into trouble, regardless of time limits, if that makes sense. So I don't know if I'm answering that. I know people want me to say an hour, 2 hours, but there really isn't an answer. And it really depends on how they use the devices, not how long they use it.
No, I actually really like that idea. It seems maybe too rigid for it to be like a specific time limit every day, and especially since a lot of kids have to use the technology for school, right, or can be using it in a beneficial way, like if they're being creative or,
right,
those are good things to be doing. We do have some questions, though. If parents have decided that the technology is becoming too ingrained in their life and they want to cut back a little bit, how do they help their kids transition from being on the computer to not being on the computer? We have some people who are experiencing kids that just are having, like, crying hysterically, one parent says, and that's for an 11-year-old who's been asked to get off the computer. What strategies could parents use?
So that's the tricky part, right? So first and foremost, you want to set up a positive reinforcement model, which means that instead of constantly restricting it, you want to sort of give it to the kids, but in a positive way. So for instance, I encourage you, if you're going to use the devices, to use them after you've done your homework or after you've gone to softball practice or after you've practiced your instrument, as a way of sort of like doing something else, and then you can reward them with the time. And the flip side of that is you don't have to take it away from them. If they don't do what they need to do, then the device time doesn't come, to sort of make it organically a part of your life. The second piece is that if you decide to let them use it, but then you want them off at a certain time, and this is much more challenging if you have a child with ADHD, but honestly, it's challenging for everybody. I think you have to be clear about how long you want them to be on it. What I want to tell parents is understand how your child's using it. So for instance, if they're playing a video game like Fortnite, which is the most popular video game right now for 2nd to 8th grade boys in the country, don't tell them that they have to get off of it when they die, when they end their round. By pulling kids out in the middle of the round, all you serve to do is have an explosive fight with them. If you say to them, I'll let you play this round, but when it's over, we're turning it off, what you've said is, I understand how you're using it and what you're doing. I'm not trying to get you to lose all your points or all your tokens. Having said that, it's time to unplug. It can be very helpful to just understand how they're using it and try to have a natural ending time. Having said that, you can also be I also think, especially with ADHD kids, you need a lot of reminders. 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. Don't do this thing where you walk into the room, oh, it's time to get off, and you unplug. Then what happens is they get angry and feel very unsupported, and then you're fighting, right? The goal is, all right, you've got 10 more minutes. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, now you've got 5 more minutes. I'm going to let you finish this snap. I'm going to let you finish this round as long as it's not more than 5 or 10 minutes. And then we're going to shut down. Or even like if it's a TV show, if it's Netflix, if you can let them finish the show, if it's not that long, you will get a lot more buy-in. And that, I think they also feel understood. Okay, I just need to finish this episode. I'm like, okay, because honestly, I don't care if they're on for another 10 minutes. I just want in 10 minutes for it to get shut down. It's really about us as parents not getting so frustrated and trying to ally with the kids to understand, like, all right, you got to get off, but when does it make sense for them to shut down?
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. We have a couple of questions coming in about using technology as relaxation or even as like a calm down period. So if a child has had like a really rough day, and probably adults can relate to this too, maybe all you want to do is sit down in front of the TV and just chill out for a moment. But some of these parents are worried that it's becoming a bit of a crutch, and that it might be going on for too long of a period of time. Can you speak a little bit about that? Like, is it a good thing to use technology as a calm down method or relaxation? And what is the realistic limit on that?
That's a great question. So I want to start with that with talking about what I call the eye blankie. So if you think about your children, they have blankies or teddy bears or what we call transitional objects in psychiatry. And often what happens towards the end of elementary school, let's say 4th, 5th, 6th grade, is that those become less important and they begin to be put on the shelf or not used as much. And ironically, that is around the time that we give kids phones. So often kids transition from their blankie to their phone. And for many kids and adults, the last thing they touch at night is their phone, and the first thing they touch in the morning is their phone. And I'd like to suggest that this sort of eye blankie thing is something that as a parent we can control. So I really do believe that the phone should sleep in a different room. Regardless of what time you unplug your kids, the phone should sleep in a charger in another room so that there's a period of time where there's no phone. Studies do show, and I think it's a common sense, that you're going to get a better night's sleep if you're not thinking about this phone that's right here. We're also trying not to foster this dependence on the phone. The other piece is to buy your kids and yourself an alarm clock so that you don't need to use the phone as an alarm clock. Therefore, it's not necessarily the first thing that you touch. So that's in terms of sleeping. I do think that the phone and devices can be used as a self-soothing mechanism, and I think it's one of the great things about technologies that we have this. So I absolutely think that it's a great way to unwind. For kids, I think TV's become a good way to unwind. It really was a good way to unwind when we were growing up. I'd love to encourage kids that are watching TVs as a wind down not to watch them on their phone, to either watch it on an old school phone that's on the wall, or to even watch it on a computer, because a lot of kids watch TV on their phones. And I think just from a relaxation perspective, it hurts your neck. It's a small screen. It makes sense to me that if you're going to watch an episode of something to relax, it would be better to do it on a computer or on a real screen. And if you do it on a real screen, it's also something that you could co-engage with your parents. So I love the idea. I know we used to not like it 10 or 20 years ago, but today I love the idea of watching a TV show with your kids at the end of the evening. There's interaction. There's an ability to relax. And studies show that your kids get the best effect of technology when you co-engage with them. So literally watching even a dumb TV show where there's some back and forth and you're watching it together can be sort of relaxing. In terms of dependency, it really depends on how your children use it. I think it's a real life tool. You carry this phone with you. And if the way that you're managing stress in your life is to text your mom or to do a mindfulness, there's all these great mindfulness apps and relaxation apps. I love those. I think what a lot of people are doing is decompressing, getting into bed with their phones and texting and snapping. I can live without that. But what I would encourage as parents is to say, all right, you want to use it to relax. You want to use it when you're feeling anxious. How can we use it? Like there's all of those mindfulness and meditation apps. Those are great. If the idea is you want to talk to a friend, you want to FaceTime a friend, I think can be great. I think what we're trying to do is get away from the social media thing where they can't actually turn it off. And I'm not really sure how relaxing it is. So again, this is about keeping the communication open with your kids, understanding how they're using it, and recognizing when there's an overdependence and when it's actually a helpful tool. I find for kids with anxiety and grown-ups with anxiety, it can be very helpful. Like people will, whether, is it a crutch? Perhaps. It can also be a tool to manage, you're walking to a place and you're uncomfortable. I'd love for you to make eye contact and talk to someone. But until that happens, you want to walk in with your phone? Okay. But the key has to be that you're going to be on your phone for 2 or 3 minutes until your heart rate drops and you're a little bit comfortable. Then you're going to put the phone away and you're going to walk up to somebody, make eye contact, and have a real interaction. It's about using it as an aid to manage anxiety, not necessarily as a replacement for social interaction.
Yeah, thank you.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. What about if parents have different rules for technology use during the week as compared to weekends? We have a parent who a 7-year-old is not allowed to use tablets during the week, but then he wants to binge on the weekends. And he would just stay on it all day if he could. Do you have any advice as to should it be different on weekdays and weekends? And if so, how do you manage that binge time?
So I like to use the metaphor. If you've got a 7 or 8-year-old and you've been to I'm sure you've been to a birthday party where the cake and the ice cream has been served, and there's always one child who's sitting at the table, like stuffing their face with the ice cream and the cake, and all the parents are looking around saying, "Oh yeah, that's the child that isn't allowed to have ice cream and cake at home." Whereas the other kids have one scoop of their ice cream, one scoop of the cake, and then run around, right? So you want to be careful as a parent not to create a binge model where you're restricting, and then when they have an option, it feels like they're binging. Because our goal is to seamlessly balance technology into our lives. Having said that, for younger kids, I think that sometimes there isn't a reason to have the devices Monday through Friday. I think if you find that your children are binging, I think the reality is to try to manage that a little bit. I don't love this idea of no devices Monday through Friday and then 5 hours of devices on Saturday. I'm not exactly sure what message we're sending. Now, sometimes it's just the reality of your life. But I would argue that I'd rather them had an hour a day Monday through Friday, and they're allowed to be on it for 2 hours on Saturday. And then you all go out somewhere, or go out to lunch. So the idea is that we're leaving at noon, and you can be on it before noon, but then we're leaving, organically leaving the house. I think you have to be thoughtful about what you're achieving with the binge model.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, I have a couple questions about using technology as rewards and as punishments. Can you speak a little to how parents should do that or should not do that?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I wish we could all stop doing that, but then I'd be a hypocrite because I threaten to take the phone away from my kids on a daily basis. So the reality is I think it's a very powerful tool that we have as parents, and we can't ignore it. I do think it's problematic when we are rewarding and restricting devices for behavior that's not related to the devices, if that makes sense. So the best time to reward it and to restrict it is when, like if they misuse the device, of course you should take the device away. If they use it responsibly, it makes sense to me that they can have more time on it. I think it gets a little bit more complicated when they don't brush their teeth and we take the phone away. But of course, that is what we all do. So as a psychiatrist and a parenting person, the shift always should be towards positive reinforcement. That's particularly challenging, I know, with parents of ADHD kids. It's still the most research-driven way to parent, and that is the reward process. So if you get, the one I like the best is if you get up in the morning, you get dressed, you eat breakfast, and you brush your teeth, then I will give you the 10 minutes until the bus comes or until we're leaving to play on your device. So you've rewarded it, but it's an organic reward. And you don't have to restrict it, because if they can't get it together and can't get their clothes on and eat their breakfast, there's no punishment. They just don't get to have the 10 minutes on their phone. Mm-hmm. But if they do everything, which is one of the things that we're challenged with ADHD kids to do in the mornings to help them go, transition from one thing to the next, the last transition could be you can play on your phone for a little bit until we leave. And that's a wonderful way to use it as a reward. And again, so you have to be mindful, because every parent in the country is basically screaming at their kids and threatening to take the phone away. And I think a lot of the time the kids are just ignoring it. So you want to be thoughtful about how you're using it. I like the idea of rewarding it. You come home, you do your homework, you study for this quiz, you eat dinner with all of us, you talk to your grandmother for 10 minutes on the phone, and then you can play your game for an hour. But again, you see, there's no punishment. If you don't do all of those things, the devices just don't happen. But if you do everything you're supposed to do, then perhaps it's fine to be on your devices for entertainment or for relaxation. So you just have to be careful. And the thing about behavioral plans is that the more complicated a behavioral plan is, the less likely that you'll be able to keep with it. So I would warn against, if you do this, you get 10 minutes of time. And if you do this, you get 15 minutes of device time. That tends to not work. It's better just to say, if you do what you need to do, then we're going to give you some time on your device.
I really like that, the idea of having an organic reward rather than tying it to something that's unrelated. Yeah. That's a great idea. And simplifying the contracts. I've definitely seen contracts that were too hard to keep track of, and you're right, then it just doesn't work.
And you lose all your cred as a parent, right?
Yeah, totally.
So we need as simple as possible, and then be mindful when you restrict it, because again, like all parenting, if you're going to restrict it, really mean that you're going to restrict it. And if you're restricting it, have a clear explanation to your kids why you're restricting it, because they're looking to understand your thinking. And if it's just that you have nothing else, you're not sending the right message. And the other piece is, and this is my big issue, is try to get your kids to spend time on their devices doing something that you're happy with. Like if my kids want to watch the TED Kid Talks on YouTube, I'm like, go at it. Spend as much time as you want, right? And sometimes I'll say, it's time to go on Typing Pal because one of my fourth graders learning to type. And once you've been on Typing Pal for a little bit, you can watch another episode on Netflix. So again, what I'm trying to do is get her, maybe successfully, maybe not, but I'm trying to sort of reward her for using the technology in a positive way. So again, organic and simple, and with ADHD kids, be mindful of like too many behavioral plans. And the other thing is we don't want to frustrate the kids. With the ADHD kids, we want them to feel successful. So if you have too many restrictions, all they do is feel bad about themselves. And everybody's yelling at them and telling them how bad they are, which is what we're trying to move away from.
Exactly. Good point. We had an interesting question come in that I've heard of this before as well, and I'm not sure if you will know the answer, but I figured that I would ask. Do you know of any research about changing the color of screens, like to a black and white screen, or to reduce I know like the blue light I've heard about can make it hard for people to sleep at the end of the day. Do you know any research about that?
So what bothers me about this research is that it's inconsistent, and if you go online, you get misinformation. There is real research about the blue light. I think it's the white light that's good, and the blue light that's not as good. The blue light is supposed to inhibit melatonin, and melatonin is the hormone that helps us to sleep. It's why we sleep at night, not awake. So if the light makes your body think like you're awake, it can be problematic. The research is not, from what I can see, it's not as compelling as the internet will make you feel that it is. Having said that, if your child, I think talking about sleep is important. So I think if your child's on their device and having difficulty sleeping, you actually need to think through it and switching, the way if they're doing a lot of reading, switching the backlight so it's a more natural backlight, which I think almost all the devices can do now, makes complete sense to me. I don't know what the downside of doing that would be. I think that the reality with sleep is really thinking through your child's routine. And this is particularly challenging with ADHD kids because these are the kids that are most likely to get sort of activated on the devices, and they're the ones that are least likely to make the transition from the evening to sleep. That is a transition for them. I think sometimes we forget that going to sleep is a transition, and it is. So when you're managing your ADHD child, you want to be mindful of preparing them for the transition. You want to be mindful of having a regular routine, and that includes the device piece. The other research that's inconsistent is how much you're supposed to get off the device before you go to sleep. And I really, really believe this is individual. I think it's fine to tell your kids that you want them off 60 minutes before they go to sleep. But depending on how old they are, that might not actually work. I think it's more about how activated they are and how to help them relax. And if the devices are helping them to relax, then I'm not really worried about the lights. If you're finding that they can't get off their devices or they're really worked up and you can't get them to sleep, then I think that regardless of the light, the devices need to get turned off. I think with the video games and the young kids, it's probably a good idea to give them a 20 or 30-minute window where the devices are sort of shut down. And I think with the older kids, I think being mindful of the lights, if it's a problem, and helping them examine what their bedtime routine is, and is it really conducive to sleeping. And if FaceTiming with their friend is conducive to sleeping, okay, that's fine. But you can have a conversation with your kids about it. So in terms of the lights, I think the research is still out on it. I think that the natural backlight is the way to go because it doesn't inhibit melatonin as much. And I think that we're way focused on this, and really it's about managing sleep in general with our kids. And I wouldn't worry, if your kids are going to sleep fine, I wouldn't worry about this. There's nothing dangerous about the lighting.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to squeeze in just one more question since we started a couple minutes late. And this kind of comes back to what we talked about at the beginning with not being able to multitask. But a lot of especially older kids might want to listen to music while they're doing homework. And maybe that's on a screen or maybe it's just on their phones. I don't know. But what do you think about listening to music while you're studying?
That's a great question. It's not probably the same degree of multitasking as shifting from visual tasks. So watching a show and doing homework is much more distracting than listening to music. But my question is what kind of music they're listening to. I think music that has lyrics in it is just by obvious is going to trigger things in your brain that keep you from the reading comprehension that you're doing. Having said that, I think this is another example of where you have to be honest with your kids. Like, I would have your kids do an experiment where one night they listen to their music and they do their homework, and another night they don't listen to their music, and let them figure out if they're more efficient. I also would recommend the music without the lyrics in it as a way of background. What we do know for ADHD kids in general is that often background noise can help them to focus. Like, I believe in 2018, all kids, but especially ADHD kids, should be doing their homework in the kitchen or in the living room. For many reasons. There's less distractions, but also the background noise has been found to help the kids focus more. So I think that you've got to figure it out. There is nothing... that is the type that can be okay in certain settings. I think you just have to be honest with your kids about, if it's actually helping them or if it's distracting them.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so great having you here. I definitely feel like I learned a lot, and our viewers probably did as well. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And for our viewers, if we missed your question, there were a lot of questions coming in, or if we didn't get to your question, we do have a very active community on the Understood website. You can just go to u.org/community, and you can ask your question there, and there's a bunch of other parents that probably can give you advice or input, and also we have experts just like Dr. Jodi Gold that can pop in sometimes and answer questions as well. You can also view this chat and other chats that we've done previously in our archives. If you go to u.org/calendar and then click on the archives, and you can see past chats to watch those as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.